so
Completely
much.
fine.
Let's give us a bit about you, a bit of a preamble.
So yeah, I'm Andre, as I think you all know. And I'm a writer and musician, um, and activist. Um, I'm trying to think of what I could tell you that you don't know, since you all you all probably, I mean, you know a lot about me if you've been reading. Um, but yeah, I have been on this journey for several years now to understand how do ordinary people work together to change the world, really, through collective action. And um, I would say that the Black Lives Matter movement kind of interrupted my life in some ways with an awakening of just how deep the problem of racism is. And so I look at myself as someone who is really just trying to do their part, that's, you know, without making, yeah, just without making, that work my identity, but really feeling like we all have a role to play in that. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing, trying to use my writing, my music, and whatever I've learned along the way that I can share with other people to try to make this a common sense, around the world so that people don't feel powerless and understand that we don't just have to watch, the world continue in this trajectory that was set by colonialism, racial capitalism, but we can actually create a new normal together.
No, I appreciate that. Obviously, having so many talents, I would say. Obviously, you're a musician, you're a writer. Is there one that kind of supersedes the other, or does it change depending on where you're at in your life?
No, I mean, that's interesting because for me, it has always been, I was just actually writing about this because today is the anniversary of my mom's passing. And yeah, I was
Man. You could
six
have been
years
anywhere
now.
else in the world, man. But thank you for sharing your time with us on this day. Thank you.
Thank you. And just as a young person, I remember my mom saying things to me like, you've been on a mission since the day you got here, right? And she wasn't telling me who to be in those moments. She was actually telling me what she saw when she looked at me as her son, because I've always been kind of a messenger, you know. So I remember the first song I ever wrote with its own lyrics and music was called Oppression. It told the story of Black people being taken from Africa and brought to the Americas, all kind of stuff. And I was about 12 years old. So, this has always been a part of my consciousness, but like I describe in the book, like I think all the gaslighting kind of um, caused me to suppress a lot, right? So I say that to say that music came first for me. I started writing songs when I was very young, but I don't know. I just always was. It was always more about the message than the medium. Is kind of what I'm saying, right? So for me, they're just different forms. I can say it in 3 minutes in a song, or I can say it in 5,000 words in a chapter.
Hmm.
And it didn't always occur to me that people, not everyone feels like they can do both of those things, right? Like I guess for a lot of people, they're like writing is a completely different discipline than music, but they've always just felt natural to me. My father says that it's in my blood because there are writers in my genealogy, and he himself is a reggae musician. So that's his explanation. He's like, it's in your blood, The,
Oh, thank you so much. What do you think your mum would have said about the book that you wrote? Obviously, I'm sure she would have been very proud. What do you think she would have said?
yeah, that's a good question. Um, I'm not sure. I mean, I know that she would have been proud that I had written it. And I think that she would have. Um, I think that she would have said that she understands where I'm coming where I'm coming from better, because like I described in the book, like my parents being from Jamaica, there was a lot that they came to the States not understanding about systemic racism, you know, especially because, I mean, there is political corruption, there's oppression, there's economic inequality in Jamaica, and the leaders are Black, you know. Now you can link that to you can link that to the legacy of British colonialism, easy, you know, but that's not necessarily the awareness that a lot of Jamaicans are living under, you know. So I mean, my father is alive, and my father has listened to the book more than once, and we talk about it. And what is so interesting about, so my he's a brilliant man, you know, and he was an anti-imperialist activist in Jamaica when he was younger. He studied Marcus Garvey's teachings, and he is one of those people that just knows about what's happening around the world. And, you know, he knows what's going on in Africa. He knows what's going on in South Asia. That's just the type of person that he is. So for him to not just engage the book as like, this is, you know, like in a paternalistic way, right? He's not just listening like, oh, my son wrote a book, I should listen. No, he listened, and then he was like, I need to listen to it again so I can really ingest what you wrote, is what he told me. And so he felt like he learned a lot too, uh, reading it, listening to it. I think that my mom would probably have a similar, you know, experience, you know, and feel like, okay, I feel like I understand a little bit more about the African American experience because I grew up between those worlds, you know.
No, thank you so much for that. And thank you for being so candid. And I love that you're candid, because that means we can be really real out here, because we've got some real questions to ask you in the most respectful
Yeah,
manner.
let's do it. You know, that's how I am, you know, like let's do it. You know, like yeah, it's about trying to make the world better, right? So like
Absolutely.
I didn't even write the book to sell books. I understand that's what the publishing industry is about. Like they just want to sell books. You know, they would have been happy if I wrote a book that said white people do these things sometimes and they need to stop. They would have been more than happy with that book. I wanted to put a book in people's hands that gave them the information that you're not given in school about how nonviolent struggle works, right? So let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, first of all, I'm not gonna lie, everyone's scared to ask you questions because they saw your Goodreads where you went in on that girl in it, and everyone's like, oh, what can we say? What can't we say? So I'm just gonna be and bring it out.
Okay, well let's talk about that first. Let's talk about that first.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna snap at anyone, but I am gonna be honest, right?
That's what we want.
And clearly that person, okay, there are two things going on with that comment, right? And I have no, life is too short to save face. That's how I feel. I don't care about the social norms that say you look defensive. I don't care, because there are two things that I see going on with the Goodreads comment, right? People looked at one negative comment against hundreds of positive comments and said, okay, good, I don't need to listen to this, right? And I'm like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, first off. But I mean, I understand that's how the brain works, right? Like negative comments are heavier than positive comments anyway, in general. But secondly, I'm like, there's no way that this person read the book. There's no way you read this book. Because I know for a fact, even though I've not met most of the people in this Zoom call, I know for a fact that most of us here never heard that there was a massive study between 1900 and 2019 that showed that no oppressive regime could withstand the sustained nonviolent resistance of 3.5% of the population. I know it.
I didn't know that.
Or prove me wrong. Raise your hand if you knew that.
Ash, are you here? Oh, no.
All right then. All right then. So this person writes a comment and says, and all they have to talk about is me. If you read the book and all you have to talk about is me, you missed the bloody point.
I love how you use the British swear word there, bloody. We appreciate that. It translates that.
Contextual.
Yes, it's
Yes,
contextual.
we're contextualizing today.
I wasn't sure if it was an
You understand?
ex-lover. I thought it was yeah, ex-lover that went that
Oh
tried to
no,
get
I
you
didn't
out.
know
I
who it
wasn't
was.
sure.
I didn't know who it was, but I feel a way about people engaging this work as entertainment.
Mm,
You get what I'm saying?
mm, mm,
On top of it, you're not this person can't possibly be that well versed in the Black writing tradition. Because read Asada Shakur's autobiography, and Asada Shakur is going to tell you about the way that her common sense was influenced by this colonial common sense that instills anti-Blackness in Black people.
mm,
James Baldwin writes about it as well.
mm,
Ibram Kendi writes about it as well,
mhm.
right? So I'm sitting here like, listen, some of y'all are used to folks who feel like they have to be diplomatic, but I don't care to have a career as an author.
Mm, mm, mm.
So I have nothing to lose.
And
Um,
everything to
and
gain.
I felt like, yeah, and I felt like if the critique had been substantial, if it had been cogent, I would have considered it and listened to it. But it was just nasty and personal and rude. And so I was just like, yeah, so you don't have to be afraid of me.
But
No one needs to be
definitely not.
afraid of me. I'm not gonna snap at anybody. But if someone comes at me personally, which I'm not on guard, I'm not defensively, you know,
No, we want you to keep it a
I'm
buck
gonna be just as
100%.
honest as they, I'm gonna be just as straightforward as they are with me as with them. But I mean, I'm not a mean person or a bully.
No, I
So
think you were. I thought you was keeping it 100. And
everyone take a deep breath. You can
don't worry, I know it's for white people, but none of these white people I can vouch for. No one out here is a fragile white person. So we're good. We're good.
yeah,
But I just feel like because you've been so candid, we're gonna be really real and keep it 100 a buck. I've been drinking Havana
let's
7
do it.
rum, so I ain't got no boundaries. I ain't got no boundaries. But obviously my voice, as much as I love it, it can get a bit grating. But I will just pass it on. Guys, if you have questions, which I know you do, maybe I'll start with Becky because before you came in, Becky and I were talking of everyone was talking about activism and actually it's a black person's problem. And like you said in your book, someone else made a mess. Why are we still cleaning it up? But anyway,
Yeah.
Becky, go for it with your thoughts and reflections.
Yeah, I guess we were oh yeah, sorry, hi by the way. So just before you joined the call, we were talking a bit about um activism and the role of activism. I do not feel like it is Black people's role within activism to convince white people that they deserve to exist and have live in this equitable world. And I guess, and the kind of response was like, well, what is activism, a Black person's role in activism meant to be? Um, so I'm trying to think of like a form of a question. Um, I guess my question is, what do you see then, like as a Black person, what is our role within activism to dismantle white supremacy?
No, I totally agree with you that. All right, so I think that there's some things that live in tension here. One is that I agree with anyone who says it's not Black people's responsibility to dismantle white supremacy. Um, I agree with that statement. At the same time, it's been historically proven that the oppressed often have to organize for their own liberation, right? Um, and so it may not be our responsibility, but it is within our interest. And it's more with our interest than it is within white people's. Right? Even though like white people also like um have received a colonial education, live under a colonial common sense, and need to be liberated from that. They have more to gain from not dismantling white supremacy than we do, right? And so there's a part of it where it's like, yeah, it may not be our responsibility. If we lived in a world where everything happened that was just, right? then white people would clean up their ancestors' mess, right? But we don't live in that world. And so what we're left with is that if we don't take responsibility for our liberation, then it's not going to happen. But what does that look like is the question. And that's, I think, what we have to talk about, that there are many roles, right, in freedom movements. There are many different roles. It's a whole ecosystem, you know? So a part of that dismantling white supremacy is partly the journey that I write about. Is partly the journey I write about in my book. Part of it is dismantling it within ourselves and in our own communities, right? There are a lot of Black people that think like white people. There are a lot of Black people that act like white people. There are a lot of Black people that are trying to replicate the systems, perpetuating the same cultures, the same dynamics, the same hierarchies that they learned from growing up in a world where all we have known is a world built by white colonialism. And that part of dismantling white supremacy is our work to do. You know? There's also healing work that has to be done. You know, there's resilience work that needs to be done. We're still living under with colonial institutions and systems, and we have to imagine alternative ones, new ones. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that all of that kind of stuff is our work as well. You know, so I agree that, like, I don't think that our job is to convince white people that we're human, you know, convince white people to be better, to treat us better, you know, but they're not going to fix the world by themselves.
Thank you. And sorry, I don't want to take up too much, but as a follow-up, so what are your thoughts on kind of the phrase, oh, sorry, I wrote it down because I knew I'd forget it. So I feel like a lot of the rhetoric, and not rhetoric, but a lot of the sentence that's used a lot when we're talking about systemic problems, is like, you know, oh, we need to stop looking at individual actions to solve systemic problems. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I think I read about this in the Personalist Political chapter, that it's complicated because it's kind of both, right? Like, all right, so one thing that happens a lot in my context in Los Angeles, I'm back in Los Angeles right now, unfortunately. And fortunately.
What just because you're fighting, because you're living there. So I know in the book you were in Jamaica, you made it to Mbae. Like, what? We'll get there, yeah.
Let me come back to that.
We'll get there.
But what I see a lot of times is that people want to get people together to have conversations and to discuss racism and to discuss their backgrounds and things like that, right? And I can't say that that's worthless, that there's no advantage in doing that. And at the same time, you know, that really is more of an individual, that is addressing like racism as an individual mindset or individuals. It's not gonna stop the LAPD from killing unarmed Black people, right? Now, is there an advantage to having those one-on-one conversations or those group conversations and stuff like that? Yeah, of course, because that 3.5% of people who are actively resisting that system on the streets, they need 50% of the population to agree with them. So the changing hearts and minds part is a part of it, you know. It's just, I think that sometimes replaces the active systemic approaches to dismantling the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I guess because my thoughts is a completely unrelated systemic issue is around kind of climate change. And I remember like some people who are really big in the sustainability world, and they'll say, I won't talk to you if you're not vegan, because that means that you're not taking it seriously.
Oh, if you're not vegan.
If you're not vegan.
Gotcha.
Right. And so and that to me, kind of, as you said, like, yes, it's good and you're having the conversation, but it has a smaller
But
impact.
it's not the most important, it's not the biggest contributor to climate change, to the climate crisis, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We know what we need to do is dismantle the fossil fuel industry. We need to stop the war economy, right? Like these are much bigger, right?
Yeah,
Than whether or
yeah.
not I have a hamburger tomorrow, right? And it's true. Like, I feel like I feel like I've heard different things about how much cow farts are contributing to the climate crisis, but um, we could try to shame people out of eating meat, but at the end of the day, Shell's gonna keep burning coal, right? Um, so I hear you, and we definitely need both. And I think this is where we talk about strategy, right? Like, what is the most important? Like, what is the most powerful thing we could do together in the shortest amount of time, especially with this, right? And so I totally, I still feel like, yes, like both of these things are important, but when we're talking about something like the climate crisis, to me it seems obvious that, because I know people like that too. They're like, I don't take you seriously if you still eat meat, and I'm like, but you drive a car. So I mean, like, like if we're talking about individual actions that would lessen your carbon footprint, you know.
Yeah.
But I'll say this, and then I don't, because I don't want to spend, I don't want to, I want other people to have a chance to ask questions too. But I do feel like for some reason I am often in rooms where I'm trying to get people to think bigger than those individual actions. I do feel like there is way more of an emphasis in almost every room that I'm in on the individual, the individual actions, the personal realm of these systemic problems, and that people, I don't want to just say hard time. I think that I find that a lot of people have a reluctance to think about how we can use collective action to disrupt these larger systems. And because of that, I would say like that needs a lot more attention, I think, than some of the individual things that have may have some effect, but not the level of it's not at the scale that we need,
It's ultimately like the exception doesn't negate the rule, isn't it? And sorry, Becky, did you want to say, you agree? Yeah, definitely. And because we are equitable people, Andre, we do have one man in the room as well. So you're not your own. And I feel like he's like in the screen, like he's like he wants to just come out and talk to you. So hell, like this is your shining moment, man. Don't be shy.
You had to do that, please, right? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Like I don't have much to ask, to be honest. I think I'm still kind of digesting everything.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the things that I liked about it. You just refer to very, very personal experiences and some very detailed circumstances of all the white friends you can keep, right? And that's quite interesting, for at least for me as a white person, to kind of like clarify where my behavior be a bit off, right? And for that I have to thank you in the first instance. But I have a couple of questions. So first question is, what is your strategy now to deal with white people? Basically, to when do you kind of like draw the line and just ditch that white person, for example? Also, what's your experience about what basically have you thought about ditching your kind of religious background based on potential racist experiences? And following up what you were asking, what we were discussing, to what extent do you think like abolishing racism as almost like an utopia at the moment, right? It depends on abolishing like major other systems like political capitalism, patriarchy, etc. And how do you feel that those are all interconnected, and to achieve that anti-racism, you depending on dismantle other kind of like systems around it.
It's all intertwined, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a lot.
Sorry. Sorry.
Well, as far as strategies to deal with white people, I don't. I just don't do that. You know, I do have some white friends, and I don't have to have these conversations with them anymore because they're on the front lines fighting racism. You know, so I literally never have to talk to any white people about trying to help them understand these problems better anymore. And that's partly why what I was saying in the book was saying to Black and brown people, let white people bring their people along, that spectrum of allies that I wrote about in the We Don't Debate with Racists chapter, because we have to be busy about our business of liberating ourselves. So I don't have time for that. I wrote about in the Breakup with White Jesus chapter about my spiritual journey, right? So, I mean, yeah, I wrote about in there like how I, had to really reckon with the violence of Christianity, the way that, I mean, there was a slogan literally during the colonial period. I can't remember this guy's name right now, but he was really popular, and it was like Christianity, commerce, and colonialism. This was an actual, and colonization. This was actual slogan. I think it was the British Empires, actually. I think it was, so these things are all interconnected. So of course I had to think, all right, do I want to be connected to this at all? One thing that we have to though realize is that, and this is for those who are interested in social justice, there's a really unhealthy aspiration toward purity among social justice types. So we think that we can throw people, entire systems of thought, entire institutions away for something more pure, because we're always tainted by this, it's tainted by that. And the truth is that that's not always possible, right? And so I don't have any problem with someone who says I'm not a Christian because of the history of violence or because toxic institutions, corrupt power, all that kind of stuff. But I was there. I said, like, I don't believe in anything. I don't care what religion it is. I don't believe in anything. I don't believe in spirit. That's where I was at one point, especially because the spiritual
nihilism. Is it?
Yeah, like the spiritual non-religious people were just trying to love and light, racism away. So for me, I was like, I am about the material conditions of Black people. I do not want to hear about anything metaphysical. I don't see how that can help me. But the thing is, in studying nonviolent movements, I always found that that a lot of these movements had religious people at the forefront of them, regardless whether they were Buddhist, Sikh, Muslim, Christian, And the other part of that is that religious institutions have a lot of resources to contribute to movements, and movements need resources. So for me, I came from a Christian tradition. I threw that tradition away. And then when I started studying nonviolent revolutions and how successful they were, I always found spirituality in the mix. So that made me re-question that idea, that the problem is spirituality or the problem is Christianity. For instance, I could talk about, and then I need to move on to your next question, but, I have 2 degrees in theology. So, I had to learn a lot about church history and all that kind of stuff. And there are literally, I'm not exaggerating, there are literally tens of thousands of Christian denominations in the world. And that's just the denominations that call themselves denominations. That's not counting people who practice different forms of Christianity but are not registered as denominations or don't call themselves a denomination. To lump them all together is to throw away the work of Harriet Tubman, of Nat Turner, of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who were all Christians, right? Now people will say to me, well, they would have fought for their freedom whether they were Christian or not. I'm like, maybe, but that's not what actually happened. What actually happened was you had pastors that walked the Trail of Tears with Native Americans. You had pastors that actually led slave rebellions. You have pastors and churches in the vanguard of some of the most successful nonviolent movements around the world. I say all that to say, to come back to the point that I was making in the beginning, is that we have to have room for nuance. You know, two things can be true at one time, you know. But what is not true is that Nat Turner practiced the same Christianity as those who led the Spanish Inquisition. That's just not true. You know, so you can't lump those two things together. You get what I'm saying? You know.
So in principle, you basically, normally I do this kind of separation. Like you can still have your faith or your spirituality, whether you assume yourself as Christian, as Muslim, whatever, but not be associated with the church, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can be associated with a church. You can also be associated with a church that is for the liberation of LGBTQ people, of Black people, you know, like, because there are churches like that, you know what I'm saying? So that's what I just think is it's nuance, you know what I'm saying? Which also brings me to another point. I see people who are very adamant about you know, people leaving their religions, leaving their spirituality. Assata Shakur actually set me straight on this in her autobiography, because Assata Shakur was not, you know, religious, but one of her icons she met while she was incarcerated, she met in prison, and she was talking about in her autobiography how much criticism this activist hero of hers would get because she was an ardent Christian. And so Assata Shakur had very strong words for people who criticized her, and that made me reconsider this, because I think that what I've seen a lot of times with folks who are social justice types, activist types, not saying that that's y'all, but this is what I've seen, is that there's kind of this obsession with appearing revolutionary and putting on the performance of a radical and signaling to others that I have all the right politics, right? And sometimes the appearance of being radical actually, I think, gets in the way. We can't forget, Malcolm X was a Muslim theologian. When you read Malcolm X's autobiography and he talks about what he thinks will liberate Black people, he says Islam. Now, I'm not converting to Islam, and I'm also not throwing away the work of Malcolm X. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, so I just think it's nuance. And this is when I was going down this path of saying, I see a lot of people who say we got to throw these things away. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I see you talking like that, but I also see you posting on Instagram about making money, as much money as you can, becoming multimillionaires, billionaires, all kind of stuff. So that's what I'm saying. Like, things are not pure, things are nuanced, right? Because I'm like, you throw away religion, you throw away all these other things, you still have capitalism. It's still an exploitative system. It's still destroying the planet, right? We still have nations, right? How many wars have been fought over money, have been fought in the name of nationalism, all this other kind of stuff, you know? And I'm not making an argument that we should preserve those things. I'm just saying that, like, we have to think a little bit more critically, I think. And finally, I do think that all that stuff is connected. Colonialism, capitalism, racism, sexism, patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, all of these things are connected, especially how they became solidified by these European colonizers, asserting that there is an ideal human form that everyone needs to fit within and aspire to. And if you don't, then that legitimates violence or that we can withhold human rights from you, right? And that same logic of human hierarchy, I think you can find in, you know, the global, the way that when you look at global economics, which countries are rich, which countries are poor, who's called an immigrant, who's called an expat, you know, like all these little things, you know, when you look across the board. And so I don't think that there's a way to abolish racism without abolishing capitalism and, you know, poverty and militarism and all these things, you know, Dr. King and these other freedom fighters were talking about. Again, to bring up Assata Shakur, she talked about how she noticed that every Black freedom movement in Africa that she was tracing was fighting for socialism. Which I'm not saying that, you know, that's the solution, because I don't really know that. I don't know. I mean, I've not read Marx really, and I'm not going to, because the books are too long. But yeah, I'm just not going to do it, you know. But all that to say, this is what my father and I talk about a lot too, because when I look at nonviolent movements in Africa, I see that, and not just nonviolent revolutions, I see that there's so many revolutions where the story is these people felt oppressed by the colonizers. They drove the colonizers out, and one of their own from the revolutionary movement became the dictator and started doing the same shit.
Thomas Sankara, what happened in Burkina Faso and how he got killed by his best mate for the French. That really pains me. But he was a socialist.
Yeah, Sekou Touré, similar story. You know, it happens. And so, you know, I do think that this is where things get complicated.
Thank you. Colleen's had a hand up for a while. Your hand must be aching virtually.
No, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to commend you really, Andre, for just those levels of vulnerability in your book. Your apocalyptic moments are really refreshing, because I think for me it just shows that journey of consciousness. And the thing that I was wondering about was, as first, second, third generation you know, descendants of Africa or the Caribbean, and that whole thing you was talking about, those misconceptions of our parents or our grandparents coming to the UK or the US for a better life. How do we install that consciousness and proud sense of identity? I wonder, because, you know, hearing what you were saying about how obviously you get Black and brown people who are anti-Black, and sometimes those experiences are often the worst. Those are the experiences where you feel the most betrayed. And obviously for me, every time I go out into the working world, I just have to tell myself I'm playing the game. I'm playing the game, and it's a role I have to play. I have to earn my money. I have to pay my mortgage. I have to, you know, try and have a nice life and deal with all that shit that's in your book. People telling me, "Oh, you speak really well. Oh, your hair looks nice. Is it yours?" All that shit on a daily basis. How do we install in our children that bravery to just, because I think part of it is like, I feel really passive when it comes to microaggressions and things like that. I know the next generation coming up aren't so much, but I'd actually like to be in a position where I was like, actually, that's not an okay thing to say. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just curious as to how do we pass this on to our children? How do we create the next generation that are not going to, you know, take this and continue to build? I know it's not our responsibility, but I kind of feel like, yeah, like how do I install in children, like, be proud, like know what you're working with, essentially.
I mean, I think that some of that is just what happens at home, right? Like I think that my mother and my father, even though they didn't understand the context of the United States and racism there, they were still very proud to be Black and very proud of their Jamaican heritage, well, not their Jamaican heritage, that's where their country, their culture, and they made sure that my brother and I, and my sisters, that we knew, we know where we come from, we know our national heroes in Jamaica. We know the national anthem. We know the motto, the national fruit, the national bird. We knew the folk songs. We knew the folk tales. We knew the stories. We knew all those things because they were all around the house. We ate rice and peas and curry goat and jerk chicken and all that stuff at home. We listened to reggae music. We listened to calypso music. She took us to Jamaica every 2 years since I was a baby, So, I grew up with a strong sense of pride about my heritage and about my people. And I think it really is because of, because my mom would sit down and read those books with us and would teach us those songs and all that. So I think some of that is just, us taking the initiative in whatever circles of influence we have, right, to create those spaces because, and having those conversations with our kids too. I don't have kids, but my parents talk to me about these things, So, I don't know that there's more that we can do than that. And when you talk about like what you have to do to survive, I'm like, yeah, like, sometimes existence is resistance. You know what I mean? Like we can't die on every hill that presents itself to us and make ourselves, poor, hyper vigilant, and sick in the name of liberation, because that's not liberation. Our ancestors, who were taken to the Caribbean and taken to South America and to North America, on plantations and stuff, they rebelled in large ways, like had uprisings where they killed their masters and things like that, but they also rebelled in smaller ways, by working slower, sometimes faking to be sick, all these other kinds of things that they did. And I'm not even saying you have to do that, but like, yes, sometimes, you have to, this is what I'm writing about in the book, is about strategy, right? So I think that some people have it in their heads that, and it's fine, like for them to think this way. I just don't live this way, where every time they're confronted with a system, with an instance of racial hostility, be it micro or macro, that they have to address it right then and there, right? But I'm looking for the place I can hit racism, like in the pressure point. You get what I'm saying? And so I'm not going to choose every battle, Sometimes it's not in your interest to call somebody out in that moment, Sometimes it's not in your interest. Sometimes that might backfire on you in a way that actually hurts you more. And so you might have stood on your principle, and if that's your goal, that's great. And if it was worth it to you, that's great. But there's nothing wrong with saying, all right, I'm gonna come at this a different way, that's not gonna hurt you. There was one more thing I wanted to say about that though. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's smart. And our ancestors had to do that, Like there's sometimes, how do you think we survived so long? You know what I mean? Like there was some code switching going on. There was some faking going on so that you could survive, right? But this is what I was going to say. We have to be able to, but at the end of the day, we have to also take care of ourselves. So it's not, suppressing it, right? It's also learning, like, how do we deal with trauma in the body? How do we release frustration? How do we make sure that we get our adequate rest and sleep and all that kind of stuff? How are we creating systems in our own communities, with our own families, with our own friends, so that we can experience the love that, you know, that heals the hostility that we deal with every day. I think that's another side of it, right? So that then we're not just assimilating. You get what I'm saying?
I remember Sabrina, who's in the chat, she once said to me, rest is peace. And I've really taken that on. It's true. Rest is a form of peace. Rest is a form of resistance. And I'm trying to do more of that. It's funny because Colleen and I work in the same organization, and our director said, oh, Liz hates white people. I'm like, that's not true, but I'll call you guys out, man. I ain't got time. And she ran to Colleen's like, I think you hate white people. I don't hate white people. Do you know what I mean? But I'll call you guys out every so often and don't care. But I'm mindful of the time. I know Debbie, we've got someone all the way from Australia who's come and logged in at 4 in the morning to come and talk to you. So Debbie, man, this is your moment.
Hi, Andre. The book is I don't think the book was written for me, but I appreciate reading it. It was amazing, actually. The question I wanted to ask you was, I have a friend who's been through a lot of the kinds of experiences that you explain in the book. As I was reading it, it was like, hey, she's talked to me about this. She's talked to me about this, about discarding white friends, recognizing that they're harmful, Trump being elected and what that revealed to her about the US and how about the US felt about her life. Or all kinds of things in the book resonated in terms of conversations that I've had with her. And I talked to her about it. She finds it very difficult to relive the deaths of Black people at the hands of police. So it's a book that it might be quite difficult for her to read. And I wanted to just warn her about what was in it. And the thing we talked about was this idea of having hope. And that's what I wanted to ask you. You talked about I think you specifically mentioned a book of essays that you read that were about hope. And I've got it written down somewhere, but I can't think of the name offhand. But I wondered if you had actually compiled a list anywhere of the kinds of things that you've read that gave you hope or allowed you to keep feeling hope, because that is something, especially since the Trump era, she's struggling with, because she, there's a lot of things that have been emboldened by his presidency. It's not that they weren't there before, but they've become emboldened. And things like in Florida now, someone is trying to make it illegal to mention Black history in the classroom. You know, she's seeing these things where it's becoming, again, okay to put them in law and to be very bold about them. And it makes her feel like there's not a hope of dismantling this. And so I said I would ask you about that, those resources that help to give hope.
So I would try to be really intentional about naming, all of the sources, of what I'm getting things from in the book. So I know in that chapter I mentioned Hope in the Dark. I mentioned The Impossible Will Take a Little While. And those two books alone were really helpful for me. But hope is also complicated in the sense that, it makes sense that we're looking at what's happening in the world and taking that as signals, of what's possible, what's likely, right? And that's really discouraging. At the same time, for me, and I don't see, you can't just repeat these things to people and think that the things go away, right? The problem goes away, but it's like, for me, hope is so much about what is possible if we act, right? And then that keeps me focused on what I'm doing, what others are doing. And I'm convinced that we have enough movements and organizers and activists in the world to make this thing happen, right? But what does it mean? What does the end of racism actually look like? And so all that said, I don't have a long list of things other than I mentioned in that chapter that like I have my list of hope of hope notes that I continue to update as I read, But and then the books that I mentioned, right?
Yep.
Beyond that, for me, I do think that it has a lot to do with who we're around, right? And continuing to feed the memories, right? We are living through an upsurge in naked just fascism, right? White supremacist fascism all over the world, right? White nationalism. Well, it's not the first time, all of these systems, the slave system, Jim Crow, all these things, they all come to an end, and they don't just come to an end by themselves. They come to an end by the efforts of, organized opposition, organized opposers, And that's what I hold on to, is that we have won before, we can win again, But it is a struggle, it is a fight. And I think that sometimes we're looking at this in a very linear way, So it's like we're looking for the increments of progress to continue to be positive, right? And it's just not how it works, We make a move, we gain a victory, the system counteracts, and we may get knocked out of balance. We may get knocked back a step, or several steps. We might get knocked to the ground, But we have to get up and keep fighting. The other thing I'll add to that is sometimes I do feel like it's too much to say that things are hopeless. I feel like for me, that is beyond my capacity to know most of the time, So hope is that space of uncertainty where it's like, regardless of how it looks right now, I know the power of collective action, and I know that there's a possibility that we can win. And it's beyond me to be able to say what will or won't happen. All I know is what can happen if we try. But nevertheless, I do think that there are circumstances where things are hopeless. But even then, sometimes you fight like hell just on the principle of dignity. Sometimes you fight like hell just on the principle that this is the right thing to do, If someone breaks into my house, I may not have, I may not be able to overpower them and defend myself, but I'm not going down without a fight. And that's kind of like when hope is too much to ask of me, that's kind of where I land, But I will say that I'm going to be working on exactly what you asked about, like those kinds of resources, because I do feel like right now is a really hard time to care, It's just a hard time. If you care about what's going on in the world, or you're politically aware, and feel affected by what's going on in the world, it's a hard time to be alive, I think.
Absolutely. And I wanted to add that hope is such a potent emotion. I used to work in an older adults hospital ward, and the ones that where they're about to die, but maybe they're waiting for a relative to come overseas, and they're like, I'm just going to hold on for them to come before I die. And they would literally hold on. That person will come overseas, and then they will die like a couple of days later. So for me, that's when I realized that the powerful, potent emotion of hope, and how it can keep you alive for a bit longer than maybe even you want to be. But yeah, I'm thinking about the time, and Andre, I'm really respectful and just appreciative that you've given so much to us. So I just want to give everyone one more go around. Is anybody who hasn't asked a question, has a burning question to ask Andre, because he's got things to do. So this is your final moment, or just a reflection you wanted to give. Jane said thank you. Kathy never comes. She only comes to book club twice a year, but she came for you. So she had something to say. Go for it.
Yeah, I just really appreciate you for writing the book, and it made me think a lot about kind of my position and the way that you were talking about kind of white people inserting themselves in spaces where actually it would be better for them not to be. And it just made me reflect on that and just kind of think kind of personally on that, and whether there are spaces it would be better for me to kind of remove myself from, and whether it would be better to kind of, I think one of the organisations, I wrote it down, that you spoke about, that was, I can't remember what it was called, like White People for Black Lives, I think. And I've never really heard of that as a kind of organisation, so maybe looking into something like that and just seeing if there are kind of better places to be, in a sense. But yeah, thank you so much for writing the book and for coming to see us as well. That's really cool.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I just want to say, I don't know anyone called Leroy that will go to a fish and chip shop. Because so basically next time you're in London, man, I'll take you to a good fish and chip shop. I'm saying no, like, Caribbean called Leroy is going to fish and chips anyway. So
Leroy. Oh, that's my uncle.
Yeah, I know you said that in the book about how he never took you nowhere.
I forgot that I mentioned him.
Yeah, he never took you, but he won't, because he's gonna be in all the Caribbean and the Yardie places. He ain't going to no white fish and chip shop, but some good ones. I know a few.
Uncle Leroy gave me a can of soup and a piece of white bread for dinner, and I'm like,
is that what he said? He's mean.
Yes, and like, what is wrong with you?
This is some 1800 Oliver water vibes. So sorry, man. Next time, us Londoners, UK people, we know how to host better, I think.
For sure.
For sure. And just like, thank you again. And where are you now? Like, you broke out. You were meant to be in Jamaica. Now you're back in LA. What's going on?
I'm just all over the world right now. I was
Fantastic.
in Colombia for several months, and then it's like I was having some health problems. So I'm back in LA right now, figuring out, what the next season looks like for me. Yeah.
One of joy.
Yeah, exactly.
No, thank you. And obviously I've let everyone know you got a new song out called Tandy.
Tandy Way. Is
that what she's called herself now? Because she added an extra W to her name.
Who?
Tandy Newton.
I wasn't writing about her, but it's just coincidentally the same name. Yeah,
because she actually came back and made a statement, I never put the W in, now I'm going to start putting the W in. So I just assumed that's what it was connected to.
Oh, no. Let's see.
Do you have like a little snippet you can just like share us? Because we want to hear a bit more of your art.
Yeah, I can try to do that. Let's see if this will work.
Thank you so much. It's a nice way just to sort of end it, and just like, thank you really for your time and coming.
Oh, okay. I think I need to be able to share my screen to do this.
Okay, guys. 1 second. Bear with me. I've got to give you that power. Wow, a black person with power. Wow. How does that work?
Imagine.
Then I've got to make you like the
co-host or something.
Are you now the host?
I don't know. Let's see.
Can you do it now?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Fab.
So I was supposed to drop this song today, but apparently it's not coming out till Friday. So y'all are hearing it early. Oh, that's almost done.
It feels like a bashment vibes. You can hear it, yeah, like a bashment vibes.
And you wind up your waist like a body, you walk to the bed. And I know that fragrance anyway. That cocoa butter, baby, and just enough. I feel passion in the air. A higher vibration that you're giving off. Tell me where, tell me where, tell me where. Go up with your black stuff. Tell me where, tell me where, tell me where.
There we go.
I'm
So
getting
let's
like
go.
I'm getting like a soca vibe. Like this should be at Trinidad Carnival, man. It's got like a Kes vibe to it.
Mm.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Like this is definitely like my next booty call song, man. Thank you so much. Sooner rather than later, hopefully. Come Friday, I've got to wait till at least Friday.
Yeah, it's gonna be the Friday everywhere music is streaming. You know, I was reading about what colonizers wrote about Black women, and I was like, I gotta write some more songs about Black women. So, yeah.
Are you strictly on, according to your book, like you've left the white women alone and you're only on Black women? Is that true?
Oh, that's complicated. I mean, I tried to leave room in there to be like, listen, like, I don't like Black people who are like, if you're not married to a Black person, you're not serious about Black liberation, because, again, nuance, right?
Mm.
But I will say, like, you know, my current partner is Black. I love that about her. You know, I love that for me too. You know,
We love it for you as well. We love it for you as well.
you know, so I appreciate that, you know. But I mean, again, like some of it is proximity, you know, and sometimes, again, like there are a lot of Black people that think like white people. So, you know, but I will say, like, I at least, if you find someone who shares your values, right? Like, and I think that's the most important thing, right? If you share the same values and you really can have a relationship based on mutual respect and love and support, that is, you know, that's what it is.
And that is joy. And I think that's a great place to
Yeah, that's the prize.
definitely. So your next book, you're going to come back here. You're going to swing back by our book club, yeah?
For sure.
For sure. If you're in London, got some fish and chips for you.
Okay, I appreciate it.
That isn't a euphemism. I literally have fish and chips for you. Maybe. Yeah, but just thank you. And I just hope whatever you do today to commemorate your mother's passing, I hope it's meaningful and you get that time and space. So thank you for coming again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No,
Liz,
happy
are we
New
taking
Year.
a picture?
Oh my God, we have to do picture now. Is that okay? Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Can I share it on social media? Would you be okay with that? Okay, cool. I've done all disclaimers. Whilst we're here, whilst I'm just getting it all fixed up, thank you, Colleen. There was like one little mini argument was like, why didn't you name the people's real names? And I'm like, well, you didn't need to because you didn't want to get sued. But that was the reason, right?
That's not legal. Okay. Yeah.
That was the reason. That's what I said, because you just didn't want to get sued.
Well, also, you know, to be an author and to tell stories, that's a lot of power, you know. And I also I don't think it was necessary for people to understand the lesson, right? So at that point, going further, I feel like would just be bullying them, honestly. Because the shame that it would bring to them to have their name printed in a book like that, I don't think it would be revolutionary for them. I don't think it would be a catalyst to change for them. So yeah, it just, and also it doesn't give them room to change, you know, even though I had given up on trying to convince them, you know. The truth is that actually some of them read my book and some of them reached out because reading my book was the thing. I mean, after also over the years, they were also on their own journey, but then coming back and reading my book, they saw things in a different light, you know. So imagine if I had just completely discarded their humanity and chosen to like completely shame them, you know. I don't know. It just wasn't necessary. I don't see the benefit in doing it. But I understand why some people would feel that way. Like, you know, call them out, you know. But I still believe in, you know, treating people the way I would want to be treated. You know.
Absolutely. And as Becky said, innit, they didn't deserve any airtime on your platform anyway, man. So boy, bun them, innit? Bun them, as they would say in the Caribbean, from my recollection.
Yes, of course.
Yes. So guys, we're just gonna take a quick selfie. So if you've got the book or the ebook or whatever, man, see, look, we're serious. See, we did read the book. We have it in our hands. Do you know what I'm saying? Just on the count of 3, I'm gonna take a picture. So are you ready, Becky? Yeah, we can see it, Becky. Come through. We can see it. Come a bit closer. Yeah, perfect. Don't move. Don't move. Don't move. 1, 2, 3, go. Thank you so much, Andre, man. I'll continue to stalk you on Instagram just in case, innit? I mean, just for when your next book comes out. I mean, not for any other reason.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care. Bye, Andre. Thank you so much. Amazing. Has he bounced out? Okay, guys, I know it's really late. I'm sorry I kept you longer, guys, but I thought when the speaker comes, we've got to give them the time to chat, innit? Boy, what are you guys thinking? Emma, man, you've said not one word, so I'll start with you. What do you think?
I really, it was really fascinating speaking to hearing from him. And a lot of my questions were asked, which is great. So yeah, I found the book, I think I'm still processing a lot of it, but it definitely, it felt like a book I was kind of getting. It was sort of privileged to read, I think, you know, really like understanding. He wore his heart on his sleeve, I felt, and shared a lot of really personal experiences on his journey of deconstructing like internalized white values, and that was really kind of interesting for me to learn more about. And kind of as someone else said, Kathy, I think there was a lot of like oh yeah, you're still recording me, Liz.